Citigroup. The purpose of this session is not to try and tell you about AI, but very much about empowering you as insights professionals as to how you can be the center of excellence for AI tools within your organization. Borderless Access is a full-service market research firm. We also have proprietary panels in over 40 countries. So we're very much going to focus on different things that we've used, different things that we've learned, and get the insider's perspective from David. And David, I'll hand over to you to introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. We're excited to share yet, the most exciting AI session that you'll be at today. Right? No shadow of that, right? But no, really excited to be here with Rob. We've known each other for a really long time, and obviously this topic is really hot, and we've been talking about it quite a bit at all of the places that I've worked at. And so I'm happy to share any experiences and hope that it might help.
So one of the things that we really wanted to start this off by saying is AI for the insights industry isn't new. It's been around for a very long time. The challenge that we've now got, and David's going to address this in a moment, is you've now got generative AI tools in the hands of people who don't know about AI. They don't know about insights. They're forcing you to try and do things faster, more accurately. But do you have the right tools for the job? David, you have some experience recently with Citi, and then your experience before that at Meta in terms of these different tools. So I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, I think it's very different experiences, right? Where I think we're at Meta, we were kind of at the forefront of developing AI technologies. At Citi, very much the same, really embedding it into a lot of different parts of the business. But I think ultimately you hit the nail right in the head, right? I think right now, what's unique about this and every other innovation that you see listed there, it's the unique part of those is that was really owned by us, and really we were the ones that had main eyes on it with things like ChatGPT and things like that. Now all of our executives have all these tools at their disposal, and they're perhaps thinking that they could do things that maybe they can't right now, or maybe not just yet. So it's really an important sort of friction. It's a friction that's been created, and as a researcher, we have to play a very pivotal role in balancing that act, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later.
And I think one of the things that we need to look at right now is everybody thinks that we're at the stage where it's a plateau of productivity in terms of the Gartner hype cycle right now, but we're really not. I think we really sit in that trough of disillusionment more than anything else. We kind of slide back and forth. The big thing that people really need to focus on is the quality of the insights, because what we have to remember is at the basis of all of the different tools that are in the marketplace are human insights. Everything is being statistically gathered accordingly. David, you've got some good views on this that you can kind of lean in.
Yeah, I think when we were discussing the talk today and kind of going through this slide, I just loved how it basically encapsulates our experiences so far, right? I think we've got a lot of hope and a lot of this kind of promise of what we could do, and we're kind of looking at this plateau. Let's get to the plateau of productivity, and let's just start productizing everything and building and going like 100 miles an hour ahead. And that's part of the challenge, is that the innovation is so fast, right? And we're trying to keep up with what's happening out in the marketplace. And it depends on where you work. Obviously at Citi, it's a very highly regulated environment. The pace of innovation has to really meet that sort of standard. So I think that's why we I think as we were talking, we keep talking about the fact that it keeps dipping up and down and dipping up and down because there's an influx of tools out there. There's pressure from up top to really make sure that we're innovating as much as we possibly can. But it's our job as research professionals to make sure that we kind of hit the pause button wherever possible and make sure that we're testing and learning as we move along.
So we interviewed a few different senior executives, and really the responses that came up were very different in terms of ways that they did it. It was the pressure to use AI tools in day-to-day, whether you're working for a vendor organization or whether you're working for an end-user organization, is there. The pressure is there, the speed is there in terms of what people are looking for, but they're also looking for that quality of insights. You also have that level of doubt that exists there where people are really worried about using certain tools because things that sit in the public domain. I know you had some issues when you were at Citi in terms of not being able to use tools because the environment is so regulated, and it's where does the data sit? How does that get gathered? So it's really interesting just to see what's happening, hearing from different people. Everybody is talking about AI, but do they have the education to be able to know what can be used and when it can be used and how it can be used? So, yeah, it's to this point, we have more tools at our disposal we've ever had before, but which one is the right one for the job? That's really the question.
I'm curious. I'm actually curious to hear, even from the crowd, if you guys can raise your hands, who here has gotten sort of some pressure from up top to kind of push AI tools out there and really embed AI into everything that they do? Fair amount of hands. Yeah, I think that's part of the process for sure in terms of what we're all seeing. And ultimately, what Rob mentioned in terms of education, it's so important, right, for us to be able to rely upon, like, well, what does this really mean? Where are we going with this? And come up with a very concrete plan. Now, does that sit with us necessarily? Not necessarily. It could exist in a couple different places. But really, as researchers, we have the benefit of being able to lean into our experiences and figure all that out, right?
And I think that's where it comes back down to. It's, as insights professionals, there is a worry that we're going to be replaced by AI tools. This definitely isn't the case. From a quality perspective, the way that data is gathered statistically right now, you need to make sure that the quality insights that are coming out are suitable for the stakeholders that you're actually addressing. So it's making sure that you've got the right tools at your fingertips in order to do that, but also making sure that you're double checking at every end where that data is, how it's being used, what you're using it for, and coming out with the answers that you really want to gather. Because it's about being faster and more efficient, but are you going to lose quality? How is that going to impact you? What is the data source that you're using? Talk about things like different tools in terms of like data overlays that you have that you can use. How do you validate it if you're using synthetic data in order to understand an audience? Model data is not new, right? So we've been doing data modeling for years and years and years. Now, how do you validate that? You have to go to human audiences in order to understand that. So to have those things and be efficient in terms of how you operate is really the key to the success of how you're going to operate and how you're going to work as an organization, and really how you're going to engage with your customer, whether that's an internal customer, whether that's an external customer, in terms of how that drives you going forward. David?
Yeah, I think a couple of things I'd add to that is, when AI really started coming out a lot more, it reminded me a lot of a moment in time, like not too long ago, where neuromarketing came out and really everybody was creating a biometric tool of some sort. And I'm not a neuroscientist. I don't know all that many people that are. But we were kind of confronted with this influx of tools and this tool set that was really interesting and somewhat captivating, but we had to take a critical eye to it, and just through just regular research means and just regular research methods of test and learn, and ultimately trying to create replicable experiments, we were able to really fine-tune where we were able to find some really great partners and move forward from there. So again, I think the important thing to keep in mind here is that none of this is new. We're confronted with these things on a cyclical basis. This is obviously very interesting and very important. I view it as almost as an assistant right now. I think that's the way I look at AI. I know if you guys have used AI tools all that much, I've not yet to see one that I'm just completely floored by and said, like, all right, well, this is it. This is the answer to all my questions. Because we're going to get there. And it's something that's evolving over time. And I think that's where all of our inputs become really important. The other bit that I would mention here is, as researchers, I think you really need to make sure that data is at the forefront and data capture is at the forefront of all of your businesses, right? I think there's not a lot of businesses out there who, from the very beginning and from the very onset, have determined that data collection and proper clean data collection is the number one priority. Those companies that do are probably the ones that you see at the very top of the business world right now. So it's very important to make sure that we recycle that thought process and make sure that we do, as research professionals, ensure that data quality and that the data sort of the curation of data is really put in a way so that we position ourselves to be able to take advantage of tools like this in the near future.
So I think one of the key aspects of this is, and we keep going back to this, it's efficiency versus quality. And I think this slide is very strong in terms of how it talks about that, because we talk about it in terms of AI has infiltrated our whole lives, right? But it's finding that balance of efficiency over quality being the key to how that exists. David, I know you've got some really strong views in terms of how that works for you, so I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think to me, it's like we're the little guy in the middle there, because we're sort of caught in between a world of top-down pressure that's driving towards efficiency and bottoms-up pressure where we're talking about really quality, because there are such a huge influx of tools that are out there today. And so from our perspective, it's really about being hypercritical, setting those test and learning environments, and really being thoughtful about the process that I know is really moving fast. And I sort of totally empathize with folks in the room who are talking about kind of getting that pressure from tops down in terms of AI adoption. It's really about thinking about how we adopt and adopting responsibly. Because again, this is something that one big feature and something I've been talking about quite a bit whenever I've talked about AI is that everybody here in the room is an insights leader. We all have a role to play within this, and I think where this goes is really in large ways up to us. And so we really need to focus in on how we want to develop these technologies, where do we want to go with this, and how does this really lend itself to providing that feature where it's really simplifying that little guy's life and making sure that it's creating a tool that's accessible to as many people as possible. It really does facilitate our day-to-day jobs without obviously replacing the job itself, but then also making sure that we play a very key role in developing those insights. To Rob's point, I think it is so vitally important for us to make sure that we are at front and center in developing those.
So we've done a few different experiments ourselves at Borderless, talking to different organizations and using different tools in place, from automating data collection and analysis through to chatbots and virtual assistants. Everybody's had their pain points with chatbots, I think, over time. But reducing the churn that you have from that makes it much easier in terms of working with that. Also, extracting insights from different sources as fast as you possibly can is great in terms of sentiment analysis. But again, that's passive data. It's already happened. So it's how do you validate those responses in terms of understanding that? And then synthetic data definitely has its place. But again, it's modeled data. So how do we work with that in terms of different validation tools? David, you have some experience of using some of these tools and different things going on. So
yeah, and we're going to advance the slide. Yep. No, it's there are a myriad of different tools and functionalities that you could sort of take this down. I think, when it comes to chatbots and things like that, I'm sure we've all interacted with AI-driven chatbots before. Is that technology quite there? Maybe not quite there, but it's getting there. And I think as the general nature of this is really kind of the focus and how it's going to eventually evolve. I think one thing that we haven't spoken about yet, and it's something that is really important, is that how many people are really going to be able to play in the sandbox, because AI development and building tools like this is not cheap. And the compute power that you need in order to be able to develop proper AI engines and generative AI engines is extremely expensive. So that is something that is also going to evolve over time, and as we just keep going and innovating, it's going to be something that we all need to think about, because there are a handful of players who can really afford to play in this space and innovate in this space. And so how that all develops is going to be really important over time. But just going back to this, I think there's examples aplenty in terms of how one thing I've always kind of thought is it would be wonderful to be able to have a qualitative, quantitative sample. So being able to engage with more qualitative style research in a quantitative fashion is something that this technology should be able to facilitate. Perhaps even amending for data errors, or even looking at where there might be lack of data. Synthetic data can definitely help out in that equation. But I think also just using the research that we currently have, right? I think there's just a ton of insights and research and data that we have in-house. How can we more easily mine that information through proper knowledge management tools, and be able to actually execute on questions and create more sort of self-serve environments as we're working with bigger and bigger teams, and more is demanded of us at every single stop? How can we build and facilitate the access to all that research that the team has done? These kinds of tools should really help fashion that.
Yeah, and from our side of the business, particularly for our sample business, I mean, we find that there is AI that's being used in order to crack our surveys. The challenge that you've got is now, because everybody has a mobile phone in their pocket that has a generative AI tool in it, it's how do you spot which is AI and which is human in terms of those responses. So we tested out 2 different tools, which I'm not going to mention today. And one of them, if it was 92% human generated, it would identify as human. If it was 78% with the other tool, it would identify it as a bot was creating this. And it's because people are using stock answers which are coming out of their phones in order to answer the surveys, it makes it more and more difficult to do so. So you can guess which one we went with in terms of the tool that we used to identify. But it makes it harder and harder and harder from a sample perspective to actually measure human responses. So you're doing things at speed, but again, it's the quality of sample that you need to have in the back end that really allows you to work with that effectively. We also use AI tools for generating reports. But what I found with some of the reports is when you go back over them as a researcher, you suddenly find there are bits that are missing. Because is the AI tool actually looking at all of the different pieces of information to gather that? So I know you've had some issues with doing reports and other things, so I'll pass over to David again.
Yeah, I think that's one of the huge value adds that we provide, right, in terms of, as researchers, is being able to digest information. And we've tested some of those tools in the past in different roles that I've had and looked at how we can sort of synthesize data. That's why I keep going back to the idea that it's a good assistant, because it can get you maybe part of the way there. It's not going to get you all the way there, but it's going to get you part of the way there. I think there's where this evolves and how it sort of builds upon maybe getting to know your style of survey writing or your style of presentation building. Those are interesting opportunities. I mean, maybe we can all become like our own little IPs and sort of develop our own style, and we can create like a Rob bot out there that just everybody who wants to write insights like Rob can do it. But I think and maybe you can license it. It's a side business there. Yeah. But yeah, no, I think it's super. Right now, I haven't seen something that's the perfect solution, and so it's really important to make sure that you stay on top of it, because ultimately we're the ones that are on the hook for this. And I think at the heart of it, as research professionals, trust is our major currency, right? Like when we go to those boardrooms, when we go to those conference rooms, people see us as the experts, and so we can't really blame the AI for doing something wrong. It's going to be our next. So we really need to make sure that it's meeting the quality standards that you might have held for yourself.
So now the final question is, where do we go from here? What are the best next steps? So David, I think you can talk this better than I can in terms of the different things that we need to think about as we use these tools.
Yeah, and I think we've touched upon a lot of these already. I think when it comes to not being afraid, I think AI is here to stay. I mean, I think if you look at the program here at Quirks, you can tell that right away. That's definitely embedded most facets of our business. And that's a good thing, right? I think ultimately it's thinking about how that can facilitate your day-to-day lives and really making sure that you have an active plan as an individual professional, just where that could go and what you need to sort of up-level. I think we need to be, I got this advice really early on in my career, and I've always lived by it, is that you don't need to be an expert in absolutely everything, but you really need to be aware of what's going on in most everything. And so this is something that is going to evolve, and it's really, really important to make sure that we're on top of, just the same as educating our executives, right? And making sure that when that tops-down pressure comes, you have a really good answer to be able to help them understand where we are in the journey. Are we in the trough of disillusionment? Maybe we are for our particular business. And if we are, how do we get out of that? And how do we build towards more success? I think when it comes to, when we talk about we're all leaders here, it's just alluding to what I was mentioning before. I think it's so important for all of us to take real true ownership over the development of these tools, how we analyze it, and where we want to go next. Because ultimately we're in control of that. Nobody else is. And so we really do need to take ownership over that. I think these are 3 questions that I just sort of highlight in terms of talking about when you're talking to new research vendors that are talking about AI capabilities and sharing what they do. Super important to have a good detailed discussion about privacy and security. I mean, like knowing that data is housed in specific countries or specific regions. Those are things maybe you didn't know that you needed to know. You need to know it. because there's all sorts of different rules that are attached to all of those different components. So it's really important to make sure that you're on top of that. And to Rob's point about fraud and everything else, really how we engage with the tools that we engage with is very important. When we query a system, are those queries being housed by the partners that we work with? If so, to what end? Those are really important factors, because that's actually, if you think about it, a tremendous amount of business intelligence to live in one place. So really you have to be critical about how the data is being used and executed on. The quality of the insights, we've talked about that already in terms of just how we really need to make sure that we audit everything that's delivered to us and not just take it for face value. And the transparency of model and data gathering. I think when we start asking questions, it can't be a black box, it can't be a full black box that we're engaging with. Obviously, there's proprietary methods and proprietary means, and that goes without saying. But there are certain things that we'll need to sort of make sure that we understand in order to validate and execute moving forward. But I think it's an interesting and really dynamic and an exciting time. So creating like a test and learn environment is super important.
So yeah, just to summarize, really at the end of it is the things that we really need to focus on are quality of data within your ecosystem, making sure that you are a data-led organization, and that is what is driving everything that you can do. The quality of data behind it is obviously the key. We've talked about this a lot, but it's education. Educate your decision makers in terms of how you're doing it. Conceptualize, experiment, do the different things that you need to do. It's about top down, bottom up awareness. It's about education and continuous education, and then test and learn. Create that environment that will allow you to pressure test tools as they evolve, because things are going to get better. And as they get better, we have to feed the machine in order to make them get better. So you as insights professionals are the ones with the power to be able to do that, because you really understand the answers that you're trying to get out of things, and you've conceptualized this in advance. And now it's a question of that test and learn environment and putting it to practical use. David, do you want any final thoughts before we go to questions?
Yeah, it's just going back to the idea of trust, right? I think again, we are we walk into those rooms with a built-in level of trust from our executives as research professionals, and so we really need to embrace that and think about that as we're engaging with AI as a new tool. How do we not just further establish that trust, but build on that trust, and not just drive towards efficiency? Obviously you do, but you have to really map that between quality and efficiency as well. So just keeping that top of mind as we're engaging with this, as we keep moving forward. There's going to be more and more innovation, being open to it, being educated, and making sure that we are aware of all of it. You don't have to be an absolute expert in the space, and that's okay. It's as long as you know enough to be able to guide your organizations through it and help guide your organizations through it. It's really important.
Great, so I'll turn to the floor for any questions. Yes.
I'm offering staying on top of new innovations in AI and security, and that. Is there a resource for us that is well respected that can continue to and educate us so that we're not just trolling the internet, Googling, is this AI approach legit? What's the organization that sort of is the trusted one for this kind of information?
I think that's a great question. There's no secret sauce. There's no secret sauce. It doesn't exist yet. But I think it's places like this and talking to your fellow research professionals and research communities and building a true research community is super important. I think what I've found so far is that there are different communities and groups within the research world where we can ask ourselves, not behind closed doors, or even in email forums and things like that, just very critical questions, and get helpful understanding about what they've done in their companies and what's worked for them in the past. And I've learned a ton that way. I mean, to be totally honest with you, I lean into my community a tremendous amount to be able to at least get me not all the way there, but get me maybe half of the way there in terms of at least I'm not starting from square one and really starting to build off of, and I'm happy to, if you have any questions, email me and I'm happy to answer back and let you know if you find me on LinkedIn. Whatever I've learned, I'm happy to share as well. I don't know if that's a good answer to the question, but it's the only answer there is right now.
Yeah, I have a question, but I think I'll respond to that, just in the fact that we were running some experiments in my firm and reached out to the Insights Association. I got turned on to Howard Feinberg, who then gave me some great intel about the fact that like Utah and Colorado now banned AI they got some serious restrictions on doing data collection using AI. And so board members, I'm not associated with them, I'm trying to advertise with them. That was a place where we were able to find like legal advice and actually what is legislation. I think it's a lot of work to do for us to band together. I have like 100 questions, so I'll ask you maybe 2 easy ones. What do you think are the top 3 use cases? And have you been doing any play or experimentation with new methodologies using this?
So top 3, let's see. I think the qual thing I think is number 1 for me. Number 2 is probably going to be knowledge management. And I'm thinking just in terms of like, maybe I'll move knowledge management to number 1, because if you think about what's easier to do right now versus what's harder, the longer road is going to be the quant. And I think the third one would be the methodological question. Actually thinking about how can we innovate in different methodologies, maybe just going back to my neuroscience conversation, there's ways of maybe facilitating that through AI to be able to get to insight quicker and maybe not have to stick somebody in an MRI machine to be able to get really good insights, but doing it in a slightly different way. But I think that's definitely opens up those opportunities. So I think from like a short-term, long-term, that's kind of the way I would think about it. And then I forgot your second question because I'm old. Yes, yeah. So definitely prior to joining Citi, I was consulting for an AI firm and working a lot on determining kind of unstructured data and building towards unstructured data. And I think that's kind of, I didn't mention that in my top 3 because I think that's already happening to a large part. And building and helping sort of build from that perspective a more like responsible way of doing that, and leaning a lot into my experience at Meta and working with data governance, as you can imagine. Worked with them a whole ton there as we're building towards internal data and mining our internal data in a responsible fashion. So really sort of lending those expertise. So I've been sort of working around that, and I think now really looking more into growth opportunities and figuring out what new partners we can take on to help experiment. But really, I think right now it's kind of building that muscle and really flexing it at this point, but just being sure that we're there.
So besides asking where these data centers live, who has access to them, and how they've been training their models, what other questions should we as researchers be asking these AI models?
That's a great question. I think that's definitely paramount to be able to ask. I think the other ones are some of that model sort of transparency, just helping to understand what tools are being used to develop those models, what open source tools are being used to develop those models, how is the data being used, not just where it's housed, but then ultimately what parts of your query are being leveraged, what parts of the data are sort of being leveraged to train the model in and of itself. So that's the generative portion of this is where we need to really be the most aware of, because maybe in the past you'd ask a question, you would go out into the ether and you get an answer and voila, that's it. The model itself is trained to improve itself, and with that thought process in mind, it's going to use as much data as it possibly can to improve itself. And so it's making sure that you as the client are really in the steering, with really hands on the steering wheel, as that's all getting developed.
One more question.
This is very similar, I think, but I'm wondering, I'm on the client side and we're in fintech, and so security is huge, and our vendor management process is extensive.
I don't know anything about that.
Yeah, give away your personal stuff. But my question is, like, what kind of security procedures on the vendor side have you had your client side make you go through during the process of creating an AI policy right now, and how it can and where it can be used as far as within our current software platform, but also vendors who might be enabling us to do different kinds of things with the organization?
It's a great question. I think the major thing, so you're ahead of the game in the sense that you're like part of those conversations, because I think oftentimes these policies will get created with research nowhere near in mind. And where if you think about big data, ultimately we're from a big organization, especially a fintech organization, you're talking about very personal, like very big PII, amounts of PII, large amounts of PII. That's kind of a different use case from what your use case might be, and how to translate the policies of AI for broader sort of usage of that PII level data, or that sort of to help facilitate product creation or whatever it might be, is very different from different use cases that we might have. I mean, you can sort of get all the way down to, if your vendor is leveraging AI in any way, shape, or form, you'll have to now go through a full AI audit, and that'll take more time. So the year-long process, or however long process that it is just going to become longer. So being a critical sort of partner to the folks who are making those processes and those decisions is super important. So, like, I think taking upon yourself to sort of open up those doors, as painful as those doors may be to open, and then what you find at the other side of those doors is even more painful, but like you really have to power through, because ultimately whatever decisions you make now, I mean, they're going to have huge implications for the future in terms of how painful that process could be 6 months to a year from now.
Any last questions? One more.
Poor Rob. We're doing this session.
You mentioned top-down pressure to use AI. How much of the activity focusing on research is coming from top-down pressure versus bottom-up need, or asks from people who actually need data or need the answers? And how is that dynamic balancing out?
It's a good question. I think like the top-down pressure comes through the lens of efficiency and that wonderful code word of efficiency. And I think the more you want to drive towards efficiency, we've all been through, the ecosystem in the past couple of years where teams are getting smaller, but asks are getting bigger. And so those kind of the way I think about like top-down pressure is really you're having to drive towards efficiency because of the current state of the business. I think a large amount of the bottoms-up approach is coming in. The pressure there is, you're right, like I think in the demands of all this, to find solutions, to be able to help facilitate our day-to-day lives. But I think there's a lot less, there's more ownership there, and like we can actually take a measured approach in terms of who we decide to work with and everything else. So there's more ownership there. I think that the tops-down approach is one of those things where I feel like your CEO or whomever is knocking on your door, it's a little bit harder to say no to them. But thanks.
All right. Anyone else? Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you.